Hi, welcome back to the session 6, video number 6. Project schedule management, develop project schedule process. Develop schedule process is a process of analyzing activity sequences, durations, resource requirements, and schedule constraints to create a schedule model for project execution and monitoring and controlling. The key benefit of this process is that it generates a schedule model with planned dates for completing project activities. This process is performed throughout the project. Develop schedule process has many inputs to be considered. Some of these inputs include project management plan. In terms of project management plan, particularly two plans, that is schedule management plan and scope baseline. Set of project documents, things like activity list, assumption log, basis of estimates, duration estimates, milestone list, and so on. And agreements. Some of the agreements that you have made until now will also become an input to develop the schedule. Enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets will become the input as well. So some of the tools and techniques used to develop the project schedule include schedule network analysis, critical path method, resource optimization, data analysis, leads and lags, schedule compression, project management information system, and agile release planning. The outputs produced by develop schedule process are schedule baseline, project schedule, schedule data, project calendars, change request, project management plan updates, project document updates. We already learned the basic purpose of develop schedule process. It generates a schedule model with planned dates for completing project activities. Estimates are time-based. Example, activity A will take 3 days. The schedule is calendar-based. Example, activity A will be performed between 13th to 15th February by Jane. In order to develop the project schedule, following are needed: project scope statement, activity list, network diagram, activity duration estimates, resource calendars, and company calendar that indicates the working and non-working days. Together with that, available resources will be an input for creating the schedule. Now let's have a look at one of the tools used to develop schedule. Critical path method, which is also known as CPM. The critical path method is used to estimate the minimum project duration and determine the amount of schedule flexibility on the logical network paths within the schedule model. This schedule network analysis calculates the early start, early finish, late start, and late finish dates for all activities without regard for any resource limitations by performing a forward and backward pass analysis through the schedule network. As shown in this figure, The longest path includes activity A, C, D, and therefore the sequence of ACD is the critical path. The critical path is a sequence of activities that represents the longest path through a project which determines the shortest possible project duration. The longest path has the least total float, that is usually 0. The resulting early and late start and finish dates are not necessarily the project schedule. Rather, they indicate the time periods within which the activity could be executed using the parameters entered in the schedule model for activity durations, logical relationships, leads, lags, and other known constraints. The critical path is used to calculate the critical paths and amount of total and free float or schedule flexibility on the logical network path within the schedule model. On any network path, the total float or the schedule flexibility is measured by the amount of time that its scheduled activity can be delayed or extended from its early start date without delaying the project finish date or violating a schedule constraint. A critical path is normally characterized by zero total float on the critical path. As implemented with the precedence diagramming method sequencing, critical paths may have positive, zero, or negative total float depending on the constraints applied. Positive total float is caused when the backward pass is calculated from a schedule constraint that is later than the early finish date that has been calculated during forward pass calculation. Negative total float caused when a constraint on the late date is violated by duration and the logic. Negative float analysis is a technique that helps to find possible accelerated ways of bringing a delayed schedule back on track. Schedule networks may have multiple near-critical paths. May software packages allow the user to define the parameters used to determine the critical paths. Adjustments to activity durations when more resources or less scope can be arranged. Logical relationships, leads and lags, or other schedule constraints may be necessary to produce network paths with a zero or positive total float. Once the total float and the free float have been calculated, the free float is the amount of time that a scheduled activity can be delayed without delaying the early start date of any successor or violating a schedule constraint. As you see in this figure, your critical path indicates A, C, and D. In the coming minutes, we are going to look at how exactly you build up a network diagram and calculate the critical path. Determining the longest path in the network diagram is what we are aiming to do using critical path method. Critical path is the longest duration path through a network diagram and determines the shortest time to complete the project. Near critical path, as discussed earlier, is the closest path to the critical path in terms of duration. As we discussed earlier, there are three types of floats or slack. First, total float. Amount of time and activity can be delayed without delaying the project end date or an intermediary milestone. Free float. Free float is the amount of time an activity can be delayed without delaying the early start date. The third float type is project float. Project float is the amount of time an activity can be delayed without delaying externally imposed project completion date. Critical path activities should have zero float. The formula used to calculate the float is given below. There are two formulas that can be used. First one, float equals late start minus early start. The second way of calculating the float is subtracting early finish from late finish date. Now let's have a look at an example. Imagine you are given this work breakdown structure where you have activities starting from A goes up to H. So how many activities? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you have 8 activities listed. Each activity estimated using days. And the third column indicates whether one given activity has a predecessor. Now, note that all the activities have predecessors. C is having predecessors of A and B. A, B, D do not have any predecessor. Activity E is dependent on C. F dependent on D. G is dependent on E and F. And H dependent on G. So looking at this, you are required to do the following. 1. Prepare a project network diagram. Second, calculate the scheduling times and total slack for each activity. Third, list critical path activities and project duration. So at the end of the exercise, you will have a network diagram built with the times calculated and then critical path identified. Let's dig deeper and try to do this exercise. The first thing that you need to do is to mark the starting of your project. So you generally do that drawing a circle and saying start within the circle. Is identify all the activities that do not have any predecessors. These are the activities that will be done at the beginning, which essentially means they do not have any dependencies, so you can start working on them straight as early as possible as you start the project. So we have 3 different activities that can be started at the beginning. They are A, B, D, because A, B, D activities do not have any predecessor. The next thing that you do is line up all the other activities based on the predecessors. Looking at the activities, looking at the predecessors. So after A, B, D, what comes next? So anything dependent on A? Yes, C. So you draw C here. Anything dependent on B? Yes, that is again C. So it is correct. Anything dependent on E? Yes, there are few. So similarly, draw all the activities according to the predecessors. You don't have to show the the relationship now. It's just that you need to line up them in the right place so that you can draw the arrows easily. So the next thing, using arrows, connect each and every activity based on the dependencies. Now if you look at start, all these three activities A, B, D can be executed. After A, activity C can be executed. However, C is also dependent on B, so you need to draw an arrow from B to C as well. So what this means, how you read this particular relationship is that for the activity C to start, A and B have to be finished. Then look at C and E, look at the relationship. What is the relationship? E is dependent on C. You can see this here, this one. And then G is dependent on two activities. What are those? Now if you look at this row, that is G. So there are two predecessors that are E and F. So you show that relationship as well. So at the end, you will get this particular network diagram. The next thing that you're going to do, put down the duration for each and every activity. So that is looking at this table and filling the nodes. By the way, these circles that represent activities are known as nodes. So you put down all the durations inside the circle, inside the node. Then for you to calculate 4 figures, draw a cross such a way that you can put the 4 figures in this area. So each node has to have a cross or 4 quadrants for you to calculate 4 figures. Once you are done with that, you start calculating early start and early finish. That is to say, now if you look at this, you need to start it from the leftmost left corner and start putting the figures. So when you look at these 3 activities, what is the early start? As soon as the project starts, they can be started. Therefore, I will say early start is 0. The first day, as soon as the project started, you can start there. So you put 0. That means you don't have to wait any particular day, right? So as soon as the first day starts, that is started. Then early finish. What is the earliest you can finish this activity? If you start it as the project starts, you can finish this in 4 days. That is the earliest finish this can be done. Yeah. So you put number 4, that is the duration needed for this activity. Similarly, you calculate the early finish for each activity here. Then let's move on to the next. In the next level, what you do is the same. You calculate the early start and early finish. What is the early start for C? For C to start, A and B have to be started, have to be finished. So A takes 4 days, B takes 3 days. For C to start, it doesn't require A and B both to be completed. It's just that one of these have to be completed. So if we are to start this, we have to at least wait 4 days. Look at the maximum number among the dependencies for C. So when you consider 4 and 3, the maximum number of days that you have to wait to start this is 4. So you put 4 here. And how many days does C need? 5. So if it is started at the 4th day, if this takes 5 days, what is the earliest finish? Earliest finish of C is 4 plus 5, that is 9. So put 9 here. So similarly, you're going to calculate early start and early finish for all the activities listed in the network diagram. So let's consider one more example here. Now, if you look at this one, H, for you to complete H, what is the earliest finish? So this takes 6 days. Activity number G is finished after 19 days. So 19 plus 6 is 25. So that is the earliest finish. What is the earliest start? As soon as this is finished, you can start H. That means 19 is your earliest finish for H. So when you calculate this, you will have earliest start, earliest finished, calculate for each and every activity in your network diagram. All right, so far we have drawn the diagram, network diagram. We have calculated early start and early finish for each and every activity within the network diagram. What is next is to calculate late start and late finish. If you remember, we started calculating early start and early finish from the leftmost corner. But the late start and late finish calculations start from the rightmost corner. That is from the last activity in your network diagram. So look at the last activity, that is H, that takes 6 days, and start calculating the late start. If this activity can be started at the 19th day, that is the late start for this activity as well, because there is no any other dependency for you to start this. Therefore, your early start becomes a late start. So once you start the activity, how long does H need you to complete it? 6 days. So 19 plus 6 becomes 25. That is your late finish here. Now once you calculate this, from there, next one which is left to the H, that is G. G takes 5 days. Now let's start from here. Now what is the late start of H? 19. So if this takes 5 days to complete, when you minus 5 from 19, that becomes 14. So 14 is the late finish for G. If late finish for G is 14, how many days does G need? 5. 14, 5, 9 is 19. So 19 is the late finish for G. Then go back to E. So what is the late start for E? Again, 14 minus 9, 14 minus 5, that is the duration for E, is what is the late start. So 9 plus 5 becomes 14, that is the late finish. And again calculate this same way. So you calculate the late start and late finish, right? 9 minus 5, that is 4, is the late start. 4 plus 5 is 9, is the late start. So similarly, let's calculate one more activity. If you look at F, how many days does it need? 2. Yes. So how do you calculate the late start? 14 minus 2, 12 is your late start. If it takes 2 days, what is your late finish? Yes, 12 plus 14. So similarly, you start calculating late start and late finish for each and every activity. So at the you will have a complete calculation done, identifying 4 different figures that are early start, early finish, late start, late finish. So you see a legend on the right side. So on top of each node, on top of these 4 calculations, you need to put something called total slack, which is also known as total float. Total float is calculated by subtracting EF from LF. So the formula becomes TS equal last finish minus early finish. Now, so what is the calculation again? Late finish minus early finish. What are we trying to calculate? Total float or total slack time. Yes? Yeah, so let's calculate this. What is the late finish here? 4. What is the early finish? 4. 4 minus 4 is 0. What is the late finish here? 4. What is the early finish? 3. So what is the TS or total slack? 4 minus 3, that is 1. What is the late finish here? 12. What is the early finish? 1. 12 minus 1? 11. That is the total slack. Likewise, you're going to calculate the total slack or total float for each and every activity node. So at the end, you will have a complete calculation done, having 5 calculations done. That are early start, early finish, late start, late finish, and total slack. Now, what is the critical path of this particular network diagram? How the critical path is developed is linking all the activities that have zero float, because we discussed that any critical activity has a zero float. That means you can't further delay it to any amount of time. There's no possibility for you to delay critical activities. So when you link up all the activities that have zero total slack, that will create the critical path. So in this case, here is the start. Activity A has zero float, C has zero float, E has zero float, G has zero float, and H has zero float. So when you link up this becomes your critical path. Hope this is very clear. All right. So far, we have discussed the steps in creating a network diagram and calculating the critical path. Now, I want you to do a little activity. This may take 15 to 30 minutes, but I think once done, you will have a proper understanding how exactly a network diagram is created and the critical path method is used to calculate the critical path. So the WB is given to you has many tasks. Here is where you start the project, here is you end the project. And in between start and end, you have C, B, P, A, U, T, R, and N activities. And the predecessors for each and every activity is indicated here. Some activities have more than one predecessors. And also estimate in weeks given in the third column. Now, similar to what we did earlier, I want you to do 3 tasks. Number one, preparing a project network diagram. Build up a network diagram using this WBS. Second, calculate the scheduling times and total slack. Remember the 5 calculations we did? Namely, early start, early finish, late start, late finish, and total slack. So I want you to calculate these 5 figures for each and every activity in your network diagram. The third thing I want you to do is identify the critical path. And this is exactly what is required for your assignment. So if you can manage this, you can do a great job in completing your assignment. So let's try. Now let's have a look at some of the important points about the critical path. There can be more than one critical path. It's important to understand that there can be multiple critical paths for one given project. Having several critical paths or having several near critical paths mean project has higher risk. Critical path of the project can change over time. There can be negative float. It means schedule is behind than the planned. If there is a negative float, you should compress the schedule. If you need to cut an activity duration in critical path, cut the earlier activity's duration. Now let's have a look at some other tools and techniques used for developing the schedule. Resource optimization. Resource optimization is used to adjust the start and finish dates of activities to adjust planned resources used to be equal to or less than resource availability. Example of resource optimization techniques that can be used to adjust the schedule model due to demand and supply of resources include but are not limited to resource leveling. Resource leveling is a technique in which start and finish dates are adjusted based on resource constraints with the goal of balancing the demand for resources with the available supply. Resource leveling can be used when the shared or critically required resources are available only at a certain time or in limited quantities or are over allocated, such as when a resource has been assigned to 2 or more activities during the same time period, or there is a need to keep resource usage at a constant level. Resource leveling can often cause the original critical path to change. Available float is used for leveling resource. Consequently, the critical path through the project schedule may change. The second method used to optimize resourcing is resource smoothing, a technique that adjusts the activities of a schedule such that the requirements for resources on the project do not exceed certain predefined resource limits. In resource smoothing, as opposed to resource leveling, the project's critical path is not changed, and the completion date may not be delayed. In other words, activities may only be delayed within their free and total float. Resource smoothing may not be able to optimize all resources. Now let's have a look at another technique to create the schedule or develop the schedule. That is schedule compression. Schedule compression techniques are used to shorten or accelerate the schedule duration without reducing the project scope in order to meet schedule constraints, imposed dates, or other schedule objectives. A helpful technique is the negative float analysis. The critical path is the one with least float. Due to violating a constraint or imposed date, the total float can become negative. Crashing, a technique used to shorten the schedule duration for the least incremental cost by adding resources. For example, approving overtime, bringing in additional resources, or paying to expedite delivery to activities on the critical path. Crashing works only for activities on the critical path where additional resources will shorten the activity's duration. Crashing does not always produce a viable alternative and may result in increased risk and cost. Fast tracking, a schedule compression technique in which activities or phases normally done in sequence are performed in parallel for at least a portion of their duration. An example is constructing the foundation for a building before completing all of the architectural drawings. Fast tracking may result in rework and increased risk. Fast tracking only works when activities can be overlapped to shorten the project duration on the critical path. Using leads in case of schedule acceleration usually increases coordination efforts between the activities concerned and increases the quality risk. Fast tracking may also increase project cost. Finally, a very useful, a modern technique that is used to develop the schedule is agile releasing. That is to say, you will be using the agile approach for developing the schedule. So as the figure illustrates, if you consider a bigger project, let's say your project is 1 year duration. So your one year project is divided into 3 major releases that is spread across the 12 months. Let's assume each release takes 4 months. So 4 into 3 releases takes the entire year. So in terms of scheduling, what you do is you do a high level roadmap level planning, identifying the releases and the features that you need to include into each release. However, you take the immediate release that you are planning to release and do further analysis and scheduling. In this case, release 1 is what you are targeting to deliver within the next 4 months. Next, what you do is you divide that release into multiple iterations. In this case, we are saying we are going to have 5 iterations starting from iteration 0 goes until iteration 4. And then once the iteration planning is done, you will have a set of priorities lined up and allocated for each and every release. Then you go to another level deeper. That is to look at your immediate, the upcoming iteration and plan that in detail. So agile teams put a lot of attention to get the iteration planning detailed and effective. So in that iteration planning, you may identify various requirements to cover features of your product or release plan. So in this case, I'm considering feature A, B, and C and D. And you can see that for the feature A, there are 2 stories contributing. And now how you could do the estimation and complete the scheduling is that you look at each and every task and estimate these activities. Generally, agile teams do not rely on hourly or daily basis estimations. They use a technique called relative estimations. That is just to get a sense how much work that can be done within an iteration. However, this is another useful scheduling technique, and there are a lot of teams who are adopting agile releasing. So in the later videos, I'm gonna give you a bit more details and elaboration on agile way of working. Hopefully, this will be covered there. We have concluded developing the schedule process. I hope you understood it, and it is very crucial for you to complete your assignment. So if you don't remember the things, if it's not so clear to you, I urge you to go back to the video and listen and watch it one more time. Good luck. And up next is control schedule process, which is the last process in schedule management process.